Hello, everyone. Welcome along to this special webinar. For those that don't know, my name is Jack Wickenden. I'm the marketing manager here at Learn Plus Us. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes for a few of the other people that have registered to attend, and then we'll get into the webinar proper. But while we're doing that, I will just go over a few house rules and housekeeping before we pass over to Zack to go through the webinar today. First thing that you might have noticed when you joined in is that this is being recorded. Your microphones and your cameras are turned off, so you won't need to worry about anyone seeing you if you're worried about that. But we are recording this webinar so that it can be shared later on for people that aren't able to attend live in person. You will also notice up the top of your options tabs where you have your chat, react, raise hands, etc. There is a Q&A section. That is where, if you have any questions for Zack at the end of this webinar, you can type your questions into there, and then we will do our very best, depending on how many questions there are, to get an answer live from Zack. If we can't get to all of the questions today because it's so popular, we will get an answer for you and get that sent to you via email after the webinar has finished. Okay, we're up to 38 now. So what I'm going to do is give it just a little bit longer, and then we'll get started. It's probably worth me also saying as well, if you can hear me, if you can please use the react buttons to let me know that you can hear me. Otherwise, this has all been a moot point. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bonus points for those people. Okay, right, Zack, I'll pass over to you now to get started. And as I said, I'll be monitoring the Q&As. So Zack, please take it away.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you both yourself, Jack, and Kerry for inviting me along to talk today. I had actually quite recently did a talk on radio in Bristol, who quite recently have been affected by quite a lot of very serious youth incidents, including a number of deaths quite recently. I've got a PowerPoint today, but I'm not going to bore you with PowerPoint and just repeat stuff. I'm going to kind of talk through this and see how we can all walk away with some learning and how that can influence the way we work, and also to challenge some of the dogmas and beliefs about gangs and how they impact our communities. So I'm going to go to the slide now. See if I can load it up here. Hopefully you can all be able to see this. But just before I get started, I'll introduce myself. I mean, we're a partner of Learn Plus Us. My name's Zack. I'm from Intuitive Thinking Skills. My job now is as a community development director, and much of the work that we do is about peer-led education. We work in schools nationally, and we work in prisons, and we work in communities. So the work the stuff that I'm covering today is going to be about my personal experience from my previous life and also my professional life. In my professional life, I've worked for Intuitive for 20 years as one of the founders, and before that, I'd worked in forensic psychiatric intensive care. And a number of years ago, from the age of 15, I had 20 years of homelessness. So as I said, when I do my presentations, I'm talking from, if you like, both sides of the counter, from personal experiences and professional experiences. So I'll just go over to today's agenda, the things I'm going to talk about. So we're going to be talking about gangs, and the way this actually came up was it was in reference to the Stephen Lawrence day, which was only a couple of days ago. And as most people know, tragically, Stephen Lawrence died at a very, very early age, and he was murdered by a gang of racists in London when he was very young. So, you know, this is really a time to really kind of reflect and see how we as a society, as a community, as professionals, can improve people's lives through our education and knowledge. And today what we want to cover is an awareness of what these terms mean. What is a gang? What do we mean by grooming and cuckooing and county lines? And how to reduce the risks and improve opportunities for young people. How to support young people better. How to increase the opportunities for young people. and also to look for signs of young people and being involved in gangs and knife crime. So I'm going to get started off. Just look, I'm not going to bore people with statistics, but this is just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at as a society. So, of course, it's difficult to estimate the number of people involved in gangs. That's due to lots of different definitions of what constitutes a gang, of which today we'll go into a little bit more depth and have a look at that, and what gang involvement is. However, recent data says that there may be 27,000 people involved in gangs at any one time, and that 60,000 young people and children may identify as a gang member or know a gang member or have a sibling who's a gang member. There are 300,000 children who may know a gang or a gang member. There are 34,000 children who may know a gang member and have actually been a victim of violence. So when we talk about lived experience and personal experience of gangs, we're not just talking about saying a person is in a gang, but that means that a member of the family could have been in a gang, or that they've been a victim themselves of a gang. So 48% of homicides were drug related. And as you know, much of the background around much drug use is around gangs. Also, last year, over 49,000 offences related to what they call knife-enabled crime. So that data is what I picked up from the Lord's Library. Okay, so enough of the statistics. Let's get in a little bit deeper of what we're talking about. So, effectively, what is a gang? So, the agreed definition of a gang is any group of people of 3 or more individuals who have a common name, identification, identifying sign, a symbol, dress code, or colours. Now, generally, what we mean by that is 3 or more people who are involved in crime. Now, when I say involved in crime, it can't be a single instance of crime, because that can be organised crime, but that doesn't always mean that it is a gang. So gangs generally have an identification and they have an established hierarchy. So in other words, they work with each other regularly. They have shared values, they have shared beliefs, they have shared behaviours. Often they have shared location and geography. And there is that hierarchy there where some people are understudies or report to other members in the gang and that is a clear condition of their membership or continuing membership. So it's also those people whose members either individually or collectively engage in or have engaged in a pattern of criminal activity. And I think that's one of the most important things about that. So there's three or more, and that they are individually and collectively working together to engage in a pattern of criminal activity. So some examples of the things that the gangs generally collaborate for, and that's for hierarchy, so hierarchical status. In places like Manchester, where I've grown up, you know, we go back into the history of this, and we talked about stuff like the Quality Street gang. These were older organised criminals who were pretty well respected. They were involved in businesses, stuff like that. So and sometimes it's not always about drugs and violence. It can be about, for example, in Manchester, things like door wars, people protecting people, looking after the clubs at night. So it could be gangs over business, but it also includes money, property, violence, sex, power, territorial, and ideological. As we go into further, looking at the background of historically of gangs. If you look into places like Italy and you look at La Cosa Nostra and the mafia and the Gomorrah gangs, much of them came out of the farmers' unions. But we'll look closely into inner city London and Birmingham and Manchester and Bristol and see and bring it relevant to that. So one of the important things, you know, as we hear quite regularly that, there's more and more, and as we break up gangs, they're breaking into smaller gangs. So there's an important question about younger people. Why do they join gangs? I mean, particularly when they're very young and vulnerable, why do people do that? So I like to consider this and think of this in a spider's web. So young people are extraordinarily vulnerable, and when we're vulnerable and we're young, we're more likely to trust others and more likely to follow a norm, and more importantly, less able to recognize danger. So gangs, when they're first set up, require power, and before they have power, they need people to enforce and grow that power. So they actually set out to influence young people, and the way they do that is through a process called grooming, in which they fill a void in a person's life and then exploit that relationship to further their own means. So, and if you look at now, the culture of gangs is reinforced through music and media related to drugs, sex, and violence, which makes it much more acceptable and popular. I suppose if you're looking from a young person's mind, if everyone else is doing something, and it takes a lot of plaudits, and people talk a lot about someone else and almost elevate them to hero status, then the reasoning goes, then it's a good chance that it's worth our attention, because popular is good, isn't it? I always mention this human behavioral thing, that in our distant past, humans survived by grouping together, banding together. So early humans formed groups, which meant that they were more likely to survive and more able to see out their own success. So I talked a little bit earlier about how do people become involved in gangs. So people are involved in gangs either through their own choice. They might go out and look for gangs, but also the gangs themselves have a recruitment process and policy that people talk about as grooming. And the first thing gang members do is they identify a need, which is why you often see young people targeted in areas like homelessness, children going through care, children with one parent, children with a parent who might be using drugs or drink, children with a parent who might be in prison. So if you look at that impact on a young person's life, that most of the things that our children might take for advantage, like a new pair of trainers, a laptop to go to school with, a nice jacket, something fashionable, friendships, social circles, guidance, love, respect, support. Some of those things are in deficit. That young person may be missing those things in their lives. And that actually is the definition of what we mean by vulnerability. Because when we don't have something, that immediately leaves us in a sense of deficit. You go home, you go back to your mum, she's busy, she's working, or she's drinking, she doesn't have the time. So those things that my children or anybody's children may expect every single day, which is the hug, the waking up in the morning, maybe buying them some nice stuff, it's completely missing. Most gang members are aware of this and aware of that the easiest way to recruit someone to work for them is to entice them with things like trainers, money, attention, love, respect, friendship, social circles, something to do, praise. And in doing so, they know that before that they can actually involve you in more serious stuff, that they have to gain your trust. They have to gain your trust, they have to gain your respect. And that by fulfilling that need, by gaining that trust and fulfilling those needs, that what they can then do is gain control. By gaining control, what I mean is then they can start having an opinion on other things that you're doing, such as school and family. And by isolating you from your family, saying things like, Why are you going for there for? Take the day off. It must be really tough. Being in there, it must be really stressful. So constantly playing on that vulnerability. And at that time, as I mentioned in the spider's web, the further into the web we get, the more we get caught. So one of the challenges with grooming is each of those 4 stages, which is identifying, gaining trust, giving someone presents for seemingly something for nothing, giving someone love and guidance. None of this is illegal. All of this is illegal, and these are the most important steps in grooming. Because once you fulfill those first 4 steps, the next bit, which is criminal, which is legal, starts with criminalizing the person. Usually begins with very low level stuff. Go into a shop and steal something. Once you've got someone started taking risks and you start rewarding that risk-taking behavior, you've then got them. So as I said, some of the earlier stuff might be things like going into a shop, shoplifting, applauding them for their bravery, giving them small amounts of drugs to either take or sell. Again, that reward process is extremely important in this, and that young person, that child, even vulnerable adults can be caught up very quickly in this process to feel that sense of purpose and belonging and a sense of reward that anybody can get caught up in. It's exactly the same process as someone in a domestic abuse process can very easily get caught up in. That process of grooming is exactly the same. So then the criminalization, and the criminalization doesn't start with serious stuff. It's smaller stuff that gradually gets escalated from shoplifting to burglary, from burglary to violence. Violence starts off. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. If everyone else can hear Zack, thumbs up,
yeah,
please.
I have some thumbs going up there.
There we go.
Yeah, I've got, there you go. There must have been a little bit of drop. So this kind of little model here is an extremely important one because it's very easy to demonize people in there without understanding the process that got them there. It's very easy to go, how silly are they? What a stupid thing to do. You got yourself in. But actually, some of this process can take weeks and months. It can take even longer than that. And it is a slow process because most gangs and groomers know that any sudden moves, anything that would upset you would send you the other way. So it has to be an incredibly sophisticated process because in the beginning they're giving you something for nothing. In the end, you owe them. And additionally to that, you're then fighting for your life. Before you may have been fighting for your identity, but now you're fighting for your life. And at that time, I go back to spider's web. That person then has control of you. And not just that person, you're then entangled in something that you have no control of. Or you believe, more importantly, you believe you have no control over anymore because your life is it's full of fear of violence, fear of getting caught through criminalization. One of the biggest challenges, I would say, is for young people that if they're being criminalized incredibly early in their lives, and actually they can also be victims of crimes themselves. And as part of that process is this principal psychological process that we call trauma bonding. And gang violence is often about trauma bonding, and this is a psychological form of attachment. So the trauma bond is when a person forms a deep emotional attachment, a friendship, a bond with someone that often causes harm. And it can also come from a place of we are kindred spirits. We're just the same, because often, we're not talking about evil people doing things to vulnerable people. We're also talking about people who were once vulnerable themselves, repeating the process that happened to them. you know. So it goes into that idea of hurt people hurting people who then go on to hurt people. It's not always explicitly and exclusively the case. I know some people, not everyone who goes through childhood trauma, through adverse childhood experiences, ends up in gangs. Of course they don't. But what we're saying is it increases the risk because the increase in vulnerability of that person means that their guard is down. So bonding happens in all relationships. It's an entirely normal thing. It's something that happens in every single relationship, whether it's friend or family or future partner. So, but in criminal exploitation, it's used to manipulate a person against their will, and often relies on an imbalance, whether that's an age or power imbalance, involving one or more forms of abuse. So these are physical, emotional, sexual, psychological, financial. And I should have mentioned the other one in the new models of abuse, which includes neglect. So that power imbalance is a huge part of this trauma bonding, and all these factors affect the bonding process. And this can lead to, again, some of the attitudes. Well, just stop what you're doing. What are silly decisions you've made? But also, we've got to understand that in this process of exploitation and bonding, the person themselves can end up feeling sympathy or support the abuser's behavior and justify the abuser's behavior and reasoning. They'll see the abuser as the victim and themselves as the cause of the problem. Victims eventually become isolated from other opinions, and this is how we reinforce dogmas and belief systems. The victim themselves believe there is no escape. Victims that believe that there is a real and imperative danger, not only to themselves, but their loved ones, their family, the people themselves that they were made vulnerable by, that they feel this as this impending sense of danger. And even more importantly, that then they may have negative feelings towards potential rescuers. And this goes into that trauma-informed practice of understanding that, I know these words are often seen in very woolly ways, but they really do mean something. There can be, in terms of trauma towards whole organizations. So, for example, if the social workers took one of your parents or the police took one of your parents, these people are also potential rescuers. But those are the same people who took your parent away and put them in prison. So very, very negative views about, institutional organizations like police and social workers, the very same people who rescued them. So there's a complete sense of detachment. And isolated gangs and bullies and abusers, isolation from gangs and bullies and abusers becomes everyday business. So gangs operate in lots of different ways, not all are towards drugs. I had a question a few weeks ago on radio, which was about what about black on black violence? And I said, well, what about white on white violence, or brown on brown violence, or Chinese on Chinese violence, or Vietnamese against Vietnamese violence? It's actually, if you take away the demographics, gangs affects everybody. Gang members do not have a color. It's not represented by any demographic whatsoever. It happens in all communities. I've seen gangs in rich, in very wealthy, affluent areas, in poorer areas. It doesn't matter where. These criminal gangs work in come in lots of different sizes, different ages, and different colours, and they operate and do different things. There are lots of different terms in there, and I'm going to talk a little bit about cockering so that you understand a little bit more of any of our colleagues from housing. This is a piece you might be really interested, because I actually have seen firsthand and experienced firsthand how this actually works. So I'll talk a little bit through it, but cuckooing is named after the bird, the cuckoo. And the reason it's called cuckooing is because a cuckoo goes and steals another bird's nest. And so cuckooing is a form of crime in which a dealer, it's not just a dealer, by the way, because this can include sex workers as well. Someone who uses other women for or others for sex work, who profits off sex workers, may also take over a home. And it's always the home of a vulnerable person. What makes a person vulnerable? Well, either through disability or they're taking drugs themselves. And they're using that base for drug dealing or sexual sex servitude. Cuckooing occurs when the dealer befriends vulnerable individuals and turns their home into a place to keep and sell. And again, you go through that whole bonding process, that grooming process. Often what they'll do is turn up and often offer to pay the bills, the electric and the gas. Nowadays, these are known as trap houses and leave victims facing violence and abuse and debt and long-term homelessness, because once you've used your home or someone else has used your home for criminal activities, you're more likely to lose your home. And actually, there's very few landlords who'll take you on. So after befriending people who are too vulnerable to realize what's going on, the gang then invade the house and use it as their operational headquarters. So industrial revolution, this is exactly what cuckooing is. So gangs become more complex, organized, they grow. Inevitably, they have to fund their own growth. And cuckooing offers a place to go to market, manufacture, store, and distribute drugs. They use properties for dealing and storing and supplying, testing, taking drugs. This is where the overdoses happen. This is the center, the focal point for criminal activities, or for sex work. Or also, in my time, in places like central Manchester, people who've been kidnapped were taken to these sort of places. Again, another term we often hear is about county lines and understanding. This is part of the industrial revolution of crime, serious and organized crime. County lines is where illegal drugs are transported. Because what we found in 30 odd years ago in places like Manchester, it became so heavily policed that people would then say, all right, I'm going out to the neighbouring places, Salford, Bolton, Oldham, further out the better, and then out in the countryside. And then they would specifically prey on those populations. They would target the schools, and eventually, once they'd set up if you like, a hub and spoke model, a central operating office with all these little hubs around them, then they would then recruit people to supply each of those areas. And this is how you ended up in it going from a local issue to being involved in national and serious and organized crime. Drug dealing is an industry, and it works in exactly the same way. It has local retailers, local wholesalers, national wholesalers, and importers. It works exactly the same as selling fruit and vegetable. It has exactly the same levels of organization. Much more money, greater harm on our communities. So I'm just going to finish on things to look out for any young person or adult, vulnerable adult. So signs of exploitation include returning home late, staying out all night or going missing, new faces appearing, being found in areas away from home, increasing drug use or being found to have large amounts of drugs, being secretive about who they're talking to and where they're going, unexplained absences from schools, college, training or work, money, phones, clothes, jewellery, aggressive or disruptive behaviour. Also, I always think about language, sexualised language, you hear a child's language change very quickly. Street cred or whatever language that might be, their language changes. Coming home, looking for it's important to see regular injuries or looking disheveled. Having hotel cards or keys to unknown places. These are the important things to look out for. My view is this: is this problem is not going away. Much that sits behind this is the absence of, you look in areas like Newcastle where, we lost whole industries. People then became unemployed. Their children then hit poverty. Where there's poverty, there's crime. So as organizations, as partnerships, as communities, we have to all work together. And that is not to become dismissive or create barriers to people learning, educated, and finding themselves out of this. And also to be more hyper aware of the issues that we see and be supportive of campaigns to change because our communities belong to us. I'm going to take off the slide and invite you to ask some questions and any feedback on the PowerPoint, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. Thank you for going through that information. It's really interesting. We do have a few questions, but if anyone has anything that's come through or wants to ask any questions now, don't forget, just go up to the Q&A section up the top of the menu ribbon for Teams, and you can submit your questions through there. Well, the first question, one that's quickly come in through from Alex Nolan, who's here. Obviously, your slides have hit the right spot, and Alex is asking if those slides will be available after the webinar is finished.
They absolutely will be. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So what we'll do for everyone who would like them, we'll make sure that everyone is able to get access to them either via an email that we send after the webinar is finished, or we'll find some other suitable method of getting them to you. And just as a reminder as well, that the slides are great, but Zach's personal knowledge of this as well is just as good, if not better. So the recording of this webinar will also be sent out to everyone as well. Okay, we've got another question here. This comes in from Dan Gardner. It says, Zach, I'm guessing you've been involved with / part of a gang at some point in your life. Would you mind telling us how this came about, how you were recruited, and why you chose to join a gang? Apologies, Zach, you seem to have gone mute again, mate. If everyone else is having the same problem that I am, give me a reaction, because I currently can't hear him.
And then let me know what.
There you go. You're back.
I'm back. There seems to be some sort of drop. So yeah, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, everyone. If you could just leave us a reaction to let us know.
One of my worries about coming on today is I often think sometimes you can turn yourself into a bit of a cliche and say, right, I was a gang member, can I show you my scars, etc., etc. I grew up in Manchester, and a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about in the presentation were real to me. Very young, to the point where I had some family problems, and I left home very early in my life. I was 15 when I was made homeless. And the stuff that I was talking about there, not having a nice pair of trainers, wearing the same clothes day in, day out, having no money, having nowhere to live, sleeping in a phone box. And do you know what? It doesn't always mean that you're in a gang, but you don't have to be in central to this. I grew up seeing the rise of Gooch and Doddington, and all the Manchester-based gangs, Cheetham Hill, in the 1980s and 90s. And there's, if you think of it, this diagram as this full target, where usually right in the centre, there's probably about less than 5 people. And then as you go out in each of the ripples out in the edges there, people are affiliated, aware of, and in some way involved. They don't have to be involved in the violence, but But what people forget is that in most of those communities, everybody knows someone, and in some way you're involved in some way, if that makes sense. But additionally to that, violence was amok. It was a daily thing. Violence, fear of violence, firearms. Very, very young I saw firearms. I must have been 12 years old when I first saw a firearm. So it depends what you mean. You don't get a bus pass. You don't get a membership card. That doesn't happen. Yeah. It's who you know, what they do, and how you're involved with them. So that's all my thing about all that stuff about people saying, and I'm part of the gang. Well, shows your membership. In America, of course, you have lots of this stuff about tattoos and stuff like that. But not all gangs are that organized or formal in that way, but they certainly do cooperate. Does that answer your question?
I hope so. Dan, if that's the case, then do let us know. We've got another question in from Alex here. It says, for housing related issues, specifically in social housing with the restrictions, what can a landlord/provider do if they are struggling to get evidence due to access, lack of communication issues? From my experience, this happens more in social than in private.
Wow. Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's a really hard question. And I'll tell you why it's hard. Because there's so many people involved in this who are victims. They're both, can be a victim and a perpetrator of crime at the same time. And I think some people really struggle to understand how those two things are. Now, the law's changing very rapidly around and actually removing powers from landlords to move people from their properties. So there has to be lots of observations, usually criminalization from the property. Yeah. But you generally, for a landlord to take action, there has to be lots of complaints. They all have to be documented. There's a whole process, long process of documenting issues such as complaints, suspicions. It has to be a whole community thing. But then after that, what happens to the person when they've left? They then become homeless. Do they then go and do the same thing? Because one of the problems in housing is people who go through this process again and again and again. Not enough money or time is invested into changing that behaviour, because so many times that people again and again are being made homeless through exactly the same thing.
I hope that answers your question there, Alex. Next question comes from Cheryl Swales. It seems that crime and drug-related activities are rising, but there's little deterrent now. How can we reduce the criminal activity with more punishment/harsher sentences, but with less and less resources to follow it through?
Yes, I don't think harsher sentences, depending on what you mean by that, are solving problems. Some of the harshest penalties in the world in America, but they have a growing criminal justice system. Some of the least are in places like Switzerland and Sweden, Denmark, who have the least. And I'll tell you why this is. What I find is the longer and the harder the sentences, when people are caught, the less they have to lose. So what you get with that is an increase in violence. Real increases in violence. So you see in America, it's become an extremely violent society, because if someone goes away, if you knew you're going away for 100 years or 150 years, your reluctancy to hold your hands out and say fair cop reduce dramatically. Education, interventions, support, that's what we all do. Everybody should be part of this. Recognizing, informing, rehabilitation, restorative practices, trauma-informed practices. We wouldn't know where we were if these things weren't in place. But I do know this: violent societies breed violent communities. So I'm completely against increasing, becoming a more violent and more punishing society. We do have to punish, but it has to be part of a restorative, rehabilitative process. Sorry.
Great. No, that's great. Thanks, Zach. Thank you for that question as well, Cheryl. A message here from Jessie. She says, it's not a question, but just to thank you for sharing. Your slide on cuckooing reminded me of an incident with an elderly neighbour who became a victim of this. Sadly, he passed away during the pandemic as a result of abuse the gang instilled on him. My frustrations were in how he could not get support from the authorities as he was too afraid to give information. We did what we could, whether it was by buying cat food or just closing his windows when he was too weak, so he couldn't get out, get in the cold. This is the reality for so many in vulnerable areas. It's important that this is spoken about. Thank you.
Thank you. These conversations, this presentation can be an extremely emotional thing, because if I just do this in a generic read the PowerPoint, tell you what maybe you already know, but I have personal experience too. And also, some of the things I don't talk about because I have other people to protect who are also in those stories. And I'm talking real human hardships. Some of the worst forms of crimes that could ever happen to a person, I've first-hand experience of. The worst things. So it can be an incredibly, especially in such a short time, in an hour, but also because I want to protect victims. Most of the people that I knew that went to school, of the 80% of them were involved in this. So half of them are either dead, the other half are in prison. There must be a minute percent who, I went on to become a nurse. I'm so fortunate that I look back, but these are incredibly traumatic things that I don't sometimes choose to go and revisit that place, other than to inform and help other people, because this is not something to be proud of. It really isn't.
Thank you for that story as well, Jesse. Appreciate that. We got an anonymous question here as well that's come through. So this is, I guess, directly for you, Zach. It's how did you turn your life around after all of the incidents that you mentioned previously?
I did one of the most. To me, it seems bizarre that anyone would say this, because it's not the kind of advice you give to anyone else. At the time, I was taking drugs. Opiates, lots of them, cocaine. I always believed someone else was in control of my life. And one day I tested that by saying, do you know what? I said, take everything you want. And this is literally what happened, literally word for word. Take what you want. I'm paying my way out of the club today. And I stayed in this house and let them all use drugs around me. And I remember a probation officer, she gave me one of these Airfix models. It was a Messerschmitt. And I went home and I used to go and build a crack pipe. And this day I opened up this Airfix model, started making it. First time in my life, I sat there and thought, have I gone completely mad? And I went through my detoxes on my own, sweating, and I eventually came out there, and I took my first job, and it was the worst thing you could ever imagine. So I was told, and I was always told in school, the lowest and worst thing you could ever be is a cleaner. That's the worst. No, they didn't say this, but they said, you'll be a road sweeper when you get old. And I thought the worst thing you can be is a road sweeper. That's worse than being a gang member and being homeless. So what I did then was got a job as a cleaner. And do you know what I found? I found I was really good at it, and I was really organised, and people liked me and they talked to me. And it was my first job. I worked for, I'm a Manchester United supporter, and I worked at Manchester City. And I ended up as a stand manager there. I went from cleaner to burger flipper, from burger flipper teammate and team leader. But what I rediscovered in life is that I had a purpose, and that I had control over my life. And to me, that was a powerful thing. And I remember walking day from my first day in my cleaning job with my head fizzing like I was the highest I've ever been in my life, with no drugs, thinking, you've cracked it, haven't you? And the rest, I could tell you the long story about how I went upwards and educated myself and all that stuff. But it was this simple idea of going home, or this thing that felt me. Who's in control of your life? It wasn't me.
Thank you, Zack. Thank you for that. That's really interesting to hear. And yeah, as a fellow Manchester United supporter, it's great to see that Casemiro shirt in the background as well. We've got another question here from Ryan Simpson. Ryan says, formation of gangs seems to always be around criminal activities to generate money. Would you see decriminalisation of some lesser drugs, such as cannabis, as a way to reduce violence and overall gang activity?
So, just, when the gambling and alcohol became legal, actually violence increased. But also, all these years later, and there's huge amounts of harm from gambling and alcohol. The liver wards are full of people with cirrhosis. The A&E wards are full of people with alcohol-related problems. The mental health, the psychiatric intensive care wards are full of people with debt from gambling. The answer to fixing our societies isn't making bad things good, but in repairing our communities, increasing things like people's ability to work and support themselves, giving people better wages, a better infrastructure, giving people nice places to live, supporting families. You don't repair communities by making bad things good. That's not the way you do this, nor do you get it for punishing people for doing stuff. It's about focusing what's strong rather than what's wrong, and developing our strengths, our diversity, our skill sets, our communities. That's how you repair the harm that's been done to our communities. Otherwise, all we're doing is fixing the cracks without looking at the big picture.
Thank you, Zack, and thank you for that question as well there, Ryan. I've got a question for you, Zack, if you don't mind. This one's come directly from myself. When we were discussing this webinar initially, we had a quick chat about how gang members actually have an awful lot of the skills that people are looking for when they're looking for recruits and new employees. Would you perhaps just go a little bit over that with us?
You're absolutely right. Gang members, we're using the word gang members, people who are involved in gangs have incredible skills of organizational, entrepreneurial skills. Most of them, my definition for having a problem is if you're doing something despite your better judgment. I've never met someone involved in gangs who actually said, and this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, I enjoy this. But I tell you what, they certainly develop a lot of skills. If we can break down the barriers, because as a society, what we're doing is creating more certain barriers, DBS checks. I understand if it's not appropriate for someone to work with another adult or a child, but we're criminalizing every corner of our society, which means that then the most elite jobs only go to a very few percentage. So I would say yes. Give people opportunities to make amends and put things right. Give them opportunities to support themselves, recognize their skills. And one of the things we do as a peer-led organization say, actually, your qualifications are as less important than your attitude to work and your ability to do the job. That's most important to us. And I have staff now who started with us, from the age of 20 who've gone on to be regional managers. We're a legitimate organization. We're a partner from Learn Plus Us. We work in 6 countries now. Someone like me can come from a place like my side and to prove to people that you can do it. And I would say to people, I hope you don't think much of me, because if you don't, that's great news, because it means someone like me can do it. Someone like you can definitely do this. And you're right. Focus on skills, not pills. What people can do, not what people can't do.
Fabulous. Thanks, Zach. Right, we don't have any questions currently waiting at the moment, so I'll give this one last chance for everyone who, if they do have a question, then please go to the Q&A section and write them in there. Oh, there we go. Siobhan Rumble's got in there just in time. Just a comment. I worked in Stockwell for many years and tried to help some of the yardies running drugs. I had their homes turned over. However, they came to me and wanted to work. I tried to help them, but as they had a criminal record, they couldn't get work. So they were in a catch-22.
Great.
Have you got any kind of comments or suggestions on that one,
yes.
Zach?
Yes. This comes back to that idea of organizational trauma, which is deep suspicion of organizations like, it's very easy to get into a place where you believe the world is against you. No one wants to help you. It's me or us versus the world. And to define yourself as Yardis or Asians or Pakistanis or Indians or black, or to see yourself in these very narrow ways rather than being part of a global community of people. And I think, firstly, those are the barriers first to break down, because I always say that this person didn't learn to be like that. Every single one of us were once in a hospital in a tiny little cot. And at a point, nothing was different between any of us. No one can walk into the local hospital and say who's going to end up a drug user or a businessman. Everything was learned, and you have to reverse that learning first. And that's how you change the person, to get them to understand how they learned to become who they are. Because they're not Yardis, they're intelligent human beings who deserve dignity, respect, and a future.
Well said. Okay. No more questions at the moment. So what we'll do, if you do have any questions that pop into your head, perhaps after the webinar is finished. We have an anonymous one. There we go. They're all trying to keep us on, Zach. That's what they're doing. Truly inspirational. Thank you. It's time we all stopped judging, started being kind to each other, and sparing just a little bit more of our time to support our communities. Yes, I completely agree with you, Anonymous, there. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up here now. Thank you very much, everyone, for being involved and listening. Zach, thank you very much. If everyone would like to use their reactions to give Zach a digital round of applause, that would be fantastic as well. There they all come. Zack, if anyone wants to find out more about what you do and, of course, intuitive thinking skills, where can they go to find you?
So if you look for intuitive thinking skills on Google, www.intuitivethinkingskills.com, do a lot of stuff. We're in a lot of places. We're all about behavior change. We believe that anybody can change their behavior. We work in drugs and alcohol, domestic abuse, gangs, homelessness. We've all been, I would say, no matter who you are, that person that you see is just is you in a different world, in a different life. So our stuff is all about changing that behavior. So go to our website, give us a call. My name's Zack Haider. If you enjoyed what I said, thank you for giving me the opportunity. If you don't, I'm sorry for letting you down. And I'd love to have a chat and see if we could take some feedback on how I could do it better. Thank you.
I think I'd be rather shocked if anyone came back saying they were disappointed with what we've just done, Zack. So thank you very much for your time as well. And of course, I should probably mention as well, obviously, this is in partnership with Learn Plus Us, an apprenticeship provider. We provide apprenticeships in a number of sectors: business services, childcare and early years education, housing and property, and also hospitality. We also provide an ESOL course selection as well for English speakers of another language. So if you're interested in finding out more about how we could potentially help you or someone you know in those areas, then you can contact us via all the usual channels. All of our social media is at Learn Plus Us. For anyone that's just asking questions now, I can also rely again that we are going to be recording this session. It has been recorded, and the slides that Zack has used today will also be made available to everyone who has attended today. But for now, Zack, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to spend this last hour or so with you. And thank you, everyone else, for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you all again very soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.